They are rage, brutal, without mercy. But you will be worse. Rip and tear, until it is done.
The year is 1993. Hot on the heels of Wolfenstein 3D's success, id Software set out to make a follow-up game. What started out as plans to make an Alien game turned into something much more sinister, crafted in the bowels of hell. And that game would be called Doom. Since then, they've made all sorts of takes on Doom, from a direct sequel with a double barrel and more enemies to the horror hybrid of Doom 3 to even a couple of dungeon crawler spin-offs. For a while, Doom went silent and fans wondered if there would ever be a Doom 4. At last, in Doom 2016, id Software fulfilled their prayers by finally releasing Doom. Yeah, I too find it silly when these game corporations name a follow-up game as if it was the first in the franchise. Thankfully, there's the fan convention of just following it up with this year for clarity. With that in mind, this is my review of Doom 2016. After Doom 3 diverted pretty heavily from the series' roots by trying to be a hybrid horror shooter, which in my opinion conflicted with itself a little too much, the question remained how another Doom would be handled. I'm happy to say that it falls firmly into the action shooter category as it's always been. While your movement speed may seem a bit slow compared to the original, it's refreshingly fast compared to other shooters of this era, and you'll find yourself running and gunning all the same. Of course, one very welcome improvement over old Dooms is that verticality is a lot more emphasized here. You start out with a hefty jump that's later upgraded to a double jump, enhanced further by the ability to grab onto ledges. Of course, you're not the only one here. All enemies can follow you around on the map, so don't think you can just cheese them. Even the hefty Mancubus amusingly uses its guns like a jetpack to reach your level. Other additions is that you can have alt fire for most of the weapons in the form of weapon mods, and they can vary pretty wildly. They can range from giving your shotgun a grenade launcher to giving your plasma rifle a stun shot, and you can also use points to upgrade these mods to enhance them even further. Of course, it's not all purchasing weapons upgrades. You can achieve weapon mastery once you've unlocked them all, which comes in the forms of personal challenges. As I brought up in my Old Blood review, I prefer this kind of thing because it requires some level of skill on your part. Just like in Old Blood, it even keeps you progress if you die, allowing you to master your weapon relatively fast once all the upgrades for it are purchased. Just throw yourself over ledges whenever you run out of things to shoot and you'll be fully mastered in no time. The game also has some mechanics that seem inspired by Metroid Prime, or at least to me. Not just the double jump mechanic, but you can find a map station to fill out the area to make it easier to navigate, and there's often a lot of slower areas to breathe in the atmosphere. I treat this as a very good thing, of course, and it even shows Metroid Prime how to properly do ledge grabbing in first person. The only time I saw that happen in Prime is Prime 3 in very select areas, so maybe Prime 4 can take a page from Doom 2016. The enemies are mostly picked from the classic Doom, so you've got the Possessed, Imps, Cacodemons, Lost Souls, Hell Knights, Barons of Hell, Mancubus, and the Cyberdemon and Spider Mastermind. Interestingly, the Hell Knights are lifted from their Doom 3 design, which I kind of like since it distinguishes them more from the Barons instead of just being tan-weak versions of them. There's also some new enemies in the form of Possessed with shields, and thankfully they're the only hit-scan enemies in the game. They're not that common either, and you can kill them pretty easily with grenades, either thrown or from the shotgun. There's also Summoners, which are kind of similar to Archviles, but they speed around and they summon demons instead of reviving them. Lost Souls have also changed from their classic variant in that they now self-destruct on you and take a good chunk of your health away, but they're also thankfully easier to kill. There's also a new boss enemy in the form of Guardians. They prove pretty challenging to me on Ultraviolence, especially the first one, since you really have to time it to hit them through the shield. Your weapons include the pistol, shotgun, assault rifle, chain gun, rocket launcher, plasma rifle, Gauss cannon, and the BFG 9000. The assault rifle is like the chain gun from the original, straight and to the point, while the chain gun has to be wound up, although you can get a mod to pre-wind it. The Gauss cannon is also sorta new. It's sort of like a BFG Lite, especially with the siege mode. It's not as powerful, but it can two-shot a Baron, so it's no slouch. Another welcome return from Classic Doom is secrets in the form of little action figures to unlock models in the model viewer, and Classic Doom level chunks that unlocks the full version of it in the menu. Of course, not everything is perfect in this hellish form of paradise. Those classic levels have essentially no lighting levels to speak of, which I believe does them a disservice since varying lighting levels was a huge leap back in the day. The textures are also sometimes misaligned, and you still move slower, which can make navigation a little awkward. I know the classic levels are just a thoughtful addition, but it could have been done better. The main campaign also gets a teensy bit linear and reliant on arena fights near the end. It's not boring, mind you. It can be a challenge if you're not on your A game, but it definitely gets very repetitive as you're nearing the end of it. Thankfully, the game actually does away with many tropes of recent games, such as limited weapons, limited sprint, and regenerating health. Instead, enemies drop health and ammo, especially when you glory kill them. Glory kills are basically finishing moves like you would find on Mortal Kombat, or a Brutal Doom, I guess. They can get a little repetitive, but thankfully they happen so fast they never really bothered me, and if you aim for different spots, different glory kills result from it. The chainsaw also makes a comeback, but in my opinion it becomes far more useful. Instead of just revving it on enemies' faces and hoping to keep them stun-locked, you instantly kill most enemies with it. Of course, this isn't exactly a game breaker because it's on a fuel system and it consumes more fuel the bigger the enemy you kill with it. To make up for this, the enemy drops a crap ton of ammo. It's especially helpful against those shield zombies because it counts them as a weaker enemy, so it only takes 1 point of fuel to kill them with. I should also mention that I'm one of those weirdos who actually loves Snap Map, or at least I did when the damn thing used to actually work. Now I have to go into offline mode just to force it into the editor, and it seems to be an out-of-date version because it doesn't have newer features like a classic Doom template or textures for player blocking volumes. And yes, I made sure it's updated in Steam. Please, Bethesda or id Software, fix this problem because I really want to be able to use Snap Map again. It may not be perfect, but it's a very good creative tool. Multiplayer, on the other hand, just seems like a big hot mess. They outsourced it to developers of Call of Duty, and it really shows. I suggest just getting Classic Doom multiplayer, maybe with D4D stacked on if you really want that Doom 2016 experience. Despite the shortcomings, I'd say the gameplay is very excellent as a whole. The game does occasionally slow down for some plot or just slower sections, but it doesn't bother me at all. It's not like the original Doom was constant fighting anyway. And besides, you've always got arcade mode, which essentially expedites the slower parts. What I'm saying is the gameplay is very solid. It gets a little repetitive near the end, and it could be a tad faster if you're used to classic shooters, but it's still a very welcome divergence from the recent trend of shooters, and really knows how to keep your heart racing, especially on higher difficulties.
Everything has clearly gotten out of hand now, yes. But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
Surprisingly, the game's story is a pretty interesting one. There's a surprising amount of depth under the surface, but much like the Slayer, the player isn't really required to care. The long and short of it is that the UAC decided it'd be a great idea to exploit hell for natural resources. Not only are they trying to leech hell for energy, but they're trying to exploit the very demons themselves as military weapons. Of course, a very eccentric cyborg known as Samuel Hayden is the head honcho behind it all. It all literally goes to hell when Olivia Pierce is seduced by the demons and betraying everyone else. Who could have possibly seen that coming? While Sammy Boy acts like this is just some fluke and they had it all under control, I think it was pretty obviously inevitable. Unless he plans to do it all by himself and is so certain he'd never be tempted, it was bound to happen sooner or later. As the Slayer knows all too well, you can't just mess with the cesspool of the universe's evil and expect it not to blow up in your face. That's one thing I really enjoy about the Slayer here. It proves that you don't need a truckload of dialogue to get a compelling character. It utilizes the lost art of body language, showcasing how the Slayer has an extreme contempt for hell and anything associated with it. He also demonstrates very early on that he's no fan of the UAC and doesn't care for Samuel Hayden's ambitions, given he goes out of his way to sabotage their plans.
Please don't break my filters.
No.
Now, surprisingly, he actually does show care for Vega, though, and amusingly will do things like fist bump a little action figure of himself and give a Terminator-style thumbs up as he sinks into the lava. Despite not having a voice, the Guy of Doom is clearly full of personality. One thing I really enjoy is that the vast majority of the story is told in the form of logs, another aspect arguably inspired by Metroid Prime. Granted, Doom 3 also had something similar, and you can find many other games that had it, so I'm probably grasping for straws here. I like that it provides a non-intrusive way to convey the information, since slapping it in front of you would just screw up the pacing. With a log system, you only really get the full picture if you actually want to. The UAC's part is in text, while there are also some demon logs that are basically stone tablets with echoes of the main demon talking. I find it pretty nifty that the Slayer's abilities were from the Seraphim, which is the highest order of angels. It's kinda like a divine mission from God to kill the forces of hell, which I'm really into. All things considered, the plot is probably as well as it can be in a Doom game. It's very cheesy, but there's also an element of seriousness to it. I'd say it's like the Wolfenstein 2009 to Doom 3's New Order. Some may consider that inferior, but honestly I'd rather have a cheesy story than a melodramatic one, especially in a shooter. I just think it does a pretty good job putting things into context, especially when the Slayer gets genuinely angry at the UAC's crap. Doom 2016 is built on id Tech 6, an evolution of id Tech 5. While this is the first version of id Tech that John Carmack didn't personally work on, it's clearly built off of his achievements, even utilizing the virtual texturing function. Of course, unlike id Tech 5, id Tech 6 doesn't rely on baked-in lighting. It uses normal mapping and physically based rendering to really make the world come alive, and when you can afford to get the graphics on higher settings, it really looks good. I only recently got into that pleasure myself. You may have noticed that my initial video game commentary videos were on extremely low settings and with a not-so-solid frame rate. Now, I obviously can't blame the game for that. I was running on hardware well below the minimum, which is actually a testimony to just how flexible this engine is. But then all you gotta do is look at the Nintendo Switch version to see proof of that, which is basically running on a tablet GPU. From the particle effects taking shadows to the wonderfully gritty appearance of the world to the streak of shine across a demon's guts, Doom 2016 is certainly a very beautiful game to look at. The one major flaw I'd say is that when it gets to hell, it can be a bit devoid of color, which can make it look overall quite bland. Given how vibrant and interesting a lot of the demons look, it's a shame their homeworld has to look so uninspired. I understand the need to make it look drab, but classic Doom's hell levels had plenty of color and still managed to look pretty dreadful, like having pink intestinal walls and floors. Doom Eternal seems to be going in more that classical direction, which is really nice. The voice acting is likewise really top-notch if you ask me. They deliver it seriously enough that it sort of feels like an action movie, if that makes sense.
You'll need to rip out the Argent accumulator powering the Cyber Demon. Destabilizing the core will cause a rift that will send you back to hell.
You're not going to find any woe-is-me Machine Games Wolfenstein crap here, thankfully. It's mostly just characters acting urgently about the situation. So like I said, it's more like Wolfenstein 2009. Vega has a really delightful, monotone, higher-pitched voice, which sort of reminds me of Data from Star Trek The Next Generation.
You are looking at the only absolute zero cooling system ever constructed. It took years to perfect. Destroy each of the 4 coolant generators. Once they are no longer functional, my primary systems should begin to melt down.
Hearing him talk never fails to put a smile on my face, and I'm really glad that he's going to come back in Eternal. The music is very meaty and very dirty metal, which I guess could turn some people off, but I'm really into it. Thankfully, though, the game isn't all about that. It'd probably wear out the nerves pretty quickly if it was. Like the original Doom, it has some tracks that are more somber, and I especially love the choir part of the Hell theme. Whenever it played in my Let's Plays, I would always have to shut up just to let it finish. I'm sorry, but I just have to shut up. I want to listen to that music again. One thing I really like is how the BFG Division track has a reference to Waltz of the Demons in it. There's also other little winks and nods to classic Doom, such as Olivia's theme being essentially E1M5 from classic Doom's theme. The game will even make the original Doom's iconic door sound from time to time, which is a nice touch. The weapons also manage to sound really beefy, and explosions actually sound like explosions, not farts, which places it way above Call of Duty's train scene. Seriously, that is the weakest sounding impacts I've ever heard in a video game. What I'm trying to say is that while Doom 2016 isn't perfect, it excels both visually and audibly. I really recommend you try this game with hardware that can handle it on higher settings, because I learned the hard way that it makes a real difference. You can tell id Tech 6 is a big improvement over id Tech 5, and maybe Bethesda's game studio could learn a thing or two about about regenerating your game engine, just saying. I find it really fascinating how this game came to be. It would seem at one point it was turning into some kind of Call of Doom by their own admission, which could have been a disaster, like a repeat of Duke Nukem Forever. The game that probably should have been forever not released, am I right? Instead, what we got was an excellent, if slightly flawed game. While it can get repetitive near the end and the multiplayer was clearly phoned in, the actual meat of the game is very solid. I'm willing to be lenient with it because Doom 3 was very mediocre in comparison, and this is sort of their way of getting Doom back into the good graces of the people, sort of like Star Wars The Force Awakens was, in my opinion. You know, basically playing it safe to try to win people back. Now all we have to do is hope that the next one doesn't turn out like Star Wars The Last Jedi, but actually becomes good. Cheap jabs at Star Wars aside, I'm looking forward to Doom Eternal, and the future looks brighter than ever. Bethesda confirmed it'll be available on Steam, which puts my worries at ease. Here's hoping id Software can make lightning strike twice, because for good or bad, Doom will be eternal. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.